want to welcome everybody who's in the room and those on Zoom. I can see Susan Scenarios, one of our founding members there. As I think most of you know, but not all of you, we started this initiative to represent incarcerated victims of gender violence back in 2017. And we originally started just doing parole work. Since then, the work has expanded to include IGVSI, clemency, and now under the able guidance of Ross Kramer, who will be here in a minute. There he is.
on cue.
And Isabel and Bridget, we're doing all kinds of work, assisting incarcerated survivors with all kinds of issues that arise in the daily life of an incarcerated person, even if they're not yet eligible for parole. But with respect to parole, the results that have been achieved have been very impressive. In excess of 90% of the clients that we've represented have been granted parole. And we started engaging with your predecessor, Tina Stamford, back, George and I would say probably in 2019 or 2017. And then in that year, we did a training for the board, including with a leading forensic psychologist who talked to the board about trauma and the effects on memory. And so when Chairman Towns came in, we reached out to him and we met with him last summer. And we were very impressed with just how open and responsive he was, and looking for ways to make progress with the board. And he then invited us. I think we're getting some feedback. He then invited us to come and visit with the board in Albany in September. And again, I was very surprised walking into the room, to tell you the truth, to see the composition of the board and how much it had changed since we first got involved. There was a psychologist on the board, I believe, and a former legal aid lawyer. And as a matter of demographics, it was much more diverse than it was before. And so we reached out to Chairman Towns and asked him if he would be good enough to come and share his views with this group and to answer some questions. And he was good enough to accept our invitation. And so here we are.
Excellent.
And so I actually posed the first question this morning to his assistant, Chelsea, which was, is the chairman going to be wearing a tie? And she said, oh, I think he will. I think he'll be decked out in the formal attire. And she said, I'll let you know if that's not right. And she got back to me and said, no tie. And I said, hallelujah. So tell us a little bit about you. I mean, where did you grow up, and what was the path that you followed in order to arrive where you are today?
Sure. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out to come and talk with us. So I am a product of East New York, Brooklyn. And some of you may have known my dad, who served in Congress for nearly 30 years, Ed Towns. And growing up in his shadow, I decided that I wanted to step out and create my own trek in the snow, so to speak. I did not want to be anything like my dad. So after graduating from high school, and I went to the military, to the Air Force, and served the country like my dad. And when I finished military, I went to North Carolina A&T to get my degree.
What years were you in the military?
In the military from 1981 to 1986. And then came back and went to North Carolina A&T and finished my undergraduate degree and graduated in 90. Incidentally, my father went to North Carolina A&T. And then I went into hospital administration like my dad. And so I've been—
This is all part of the plan to be not like your dad.
I've been an abject failure in regard to planning my own trek. But I think going through that, learned that, the honorable thing that us Townses look to do is to give back to the community. So in some way or another, I've been on a path in order to give back. And of my 40 some odd years of employment, all but about 7 have been in some governmental form or not.
Now, the 7 where you weren't is the one place where you and I overlapped. We both worked for American Airlines.
That's right. That's right. Yes. So I was regional director of government affairs for American Airlines for 5 years up until COVID, where I covered the Northeast.
And you were a legislator for a while?
I was a legislator for 18 years, representing my home neighborhood of East New York, Cypress Hills. Some of the best work that I've been able to do, giving back again to a community that had supported me for years, and still continue to mentor the 3 people who have represented that assembly district since me, to make sure that they're able to deliver services for our community.
Now, when you came into this job, let me ask you this: what year did you assume your current position?
At the board, I've came to the board in 2021, the end of 2021, and came on as a rank and file member. I was excited about being a member of the Board of Parole because I wanted to really get involved in the casework and make determinations and help to get people reconnected with the community. And I was there for about 5 months when my predecessor, Tina Stanford, announced that she was retiring. And little did I know that I was being set up to be the chair, and quickly became the chair. As I was still just learning what the job was about.
Now, as you became acclimated, were there things that were priorities for you, things you wanted to accomplish, anything you wanted to change?
Not originally. I mean, I was there in order to go through the cases and make the determination and argue with my colleagues the need for someone getting back to their community. So when I became chair, it was a different hat, a different skill set. So there were internal things that I had to look at. I thought that as the board members, we needed better tools in our toolkit. So I focused on that. And now in my second year, I'm looking more globally. So I've taken the opportunity to meet with a number of my colleagues in other states. And I've also have sought mentoring from the National Institute of Corrections. We have a very antiquated system here in New York, as sure everyone knows. So we're looking at how we can modernize it and make it more user-friendly. So we're looking at digitalization as one thing, and we're also looking at structured decision-making, because I think that where we like to use that, saying, the definition of doing the same thing and expecting different things is insanity. I think in the parole world, we do want to do the same thing and have similar results. Too many times, our decisions for what we're going to do that day are made on our drive to the interview room. If you hear about a horrific crime, that's going to impact your decisions all that day. And a person who comes before us should have the same format and chance every single day and not let it be dictated by external forces. And sometimes we allow that to creep into our decisions.
So you've said a lot there. What kind of tools did you want to bring to bear?
Very simple. I mean, we travel around the state. So first and foremost, a good working car. I mean, I don't want, folks who are, leaving Suffolk County and headed to do interviews in Buffalo and get stuck in Syracuse. So we've got to do better with that. And then, as I said, digitalization is very, very important. The job turns by having digital files. We do not travel the state to go meet the individual. We travel the state to meet the individual's files that are hosted regionally. And in 2024, that's crazy. And I'm an arrogant New Yorker also. So to hear that places like South Dakota have a totally digitalized, system, which makes it so that they don't have to travel across the state. They can just have the files, have access to the files anytime they want, flip on a monitor and have that conversation with the incarcerated individual. That's the way we should have it here as well. So I've got to not only work in order to change our protocols, but our tools are also very important. It makes a difference. That person who's traveling from Suffolk to Buffalo, if they could go to their office in Suffolk and not have to travel that 6 hours, they're in a much better headspace in order to do the work that's before us.
Yeah, I'll confess, I wrote an article several years ago. It was entitled, "What New York Can Learn from Louisiana." Because in Louisiana, I had a case in Louisiana, we were able to submit the files digitally. It was an easy process. You referred to structured decision-making. What do you have in mind there in terms of what you'd like to see?
Well, it's a model that we're being mentored currently by the National Institute of Corrections, and it takes a lot of the objectivity out of the process. And again, we just want to be able to have some factors that we look at, some boxes that we check, and if those boxes are checked, then the person moves on, as opposed to having conversations that may not be constant the same way. Mm-hmm. So I want us to have a system, a model where we're reproducing the same thing weekly, right? I mean, if you ask someone, 7 questions today, but you ask them different questions 8 months from now, is your decision going to be different? Probably yes. So I want us to be able to standardize our practices a little bit more so that we can be consistent.
Now, you also have 18 folks, commissioners, who also have different views, how do you take the subject or minimize the subjectivity when you're dealing with so many different people with different standards?
Again, it's about standardizing. So if we can kind of get ourselves in a, area where we're all asking similar questions and we all are, getting to the same determinations, that it's a little bit better. I mean, right now we do it by conversations. And there's some of us that are a little more risk adverse than others. But I think by us having conversations, it helps us. And I think that also as we change the outlook and the makeup of the board, it'll be helpful. We talked a little bit earlier, and we have some vacancies on the board. And I think it's important that whenever an incarcerated individual comes before the parole board, that they have a possibility of seeing themselves at that table. Currently, we don't have a Spanish-speaking male, which I'm looking to do. I'm looking to get someone who was formerly incarcerated at the table as well, and also someone who can reflect the new fluidity of gender that we're also seeing within our prison population. So when we have conversations as the board, some of those pockets begin to rub off on folks. I'm from East New York, which is supposed to be a tough neighborhood. I love it and think it's a great place. But my perspective helps someone who maybe grew up in somewhere not like East New York. For instance, our colleagues in Buffalo are sometimes, interested in some of the stories that I tell. And I'm interested in some of the stories that they tell. And I think that it helps us to understand what the new normal is and how we can understand that some of the expectations that we may have had before are not realistic, right? While our colleagues at DOCS work hard in order to make prison a safe, rehabilitative situation, we understand it's not romper room, right? And so a person who comes before us for a parole interview may have had a problem. And we need to understand that and understand that just because you got into a scruff should not push back your ability for parole. We need to understand those things. And I think, through our conversations at the table as commissioners, that we're becoming a little bit more sensitized about that.
So where do you have those conversations? Do you have periodic meetings?
Yes. We have board business meetings where we go into executive session and may look at a couple of different cases that we'll talk about.
And would those be cases that have been decided already that you're diagnosing, or upcoming?
More hypothetical as opposed to re-engineering something? We will take some scenarios and just put them out there.
That's interesting. And when you think about a particular parole application, what are the factors that are most important to you?
I think we have the statutory factors, of course. I mean, that we have to look at. There's a reason why we're seeing each other, so we can't ignore the instant offense. But the instant offense should not decide what the case is. I'm more important. I think the way that I explain it to my colleagues is that we have to look at the past and the present to predict the future. So we know something happened that has you in front of us. What have you been doing with this time that you've been in the state's hands? And has it prepared you for success going forward? And I think that that's outside of the law and the language. That's pretty much how we do it.
I think probably the most significant and recurrent issue that has come up in the cases have been situations where commissioners have been alleged to have relied excessively on the seriousness of the crime. And it seems like the legislature has tried to deal with that. DOCS itself has tried to deal with that. But it still enters the picture. What are your feelings about that in terms of how important the seriousness of the crime should be, and are there ways to address that?
I mean, I think that I've reviewed cases, and under my 2 years as chairman, I see less of it than because it was really blatant some years ago, where the answer for holding someone to a 24-month hold was because of the instant offense. But I think that when someone is held and you read the reasoning, it's a little different than it was before. So I think we're better. Are we where we want to be ultimately? Probably not. We still have some work to do, but I certainly don't think that this current parole board is your father or grandfather's parole board.
Now, the statistics indicate that New York's release rate is lower than some other states, higher than some, lower, for instance, than Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. What are your feelings about where the release rate is and where you'd like to see it?
That's why I've taken time to, visit colleagues to understand what are their best practices, what are they doing. The former parole chair in Connecticut is one of my mentors now through the National Institute of Corrections. So we're trying to take some of those best practices, which there are a number of things. I spent a day in Connecticut looking at their processes, and there are a lot of things that they do that I'm kind of envious of, and I think that we're looking at. I know you're rich. I know you're going to come back and say like, well,
I'm a lawyer.
but a lot of things that I'm envious of. They have a staff psychologist. You mentioned we have one of the board members is a trained mental health professional, but we're not able to use that expertise in that type of way. So they're able to look at mental health and those types of things in a way that we're not able to look at. They also make decisions on the spot, which I think that is something that I'm very, very concerned about, that, a week and a half that you're waiting to hear what the decision was, whereas they make the determination and give you the explanation right there on the spot, which I think is a great way of
Louisiana does that as well.
Of handling things. So yes, there's some best practices around that I'm becoming familiar with, and some of this will be writing up to become departmental bills, and hopefully the legislature will look at it and give us the ability to make some changes, needed changes.
Yeah, interesting. One of the difficult things with respect to some of the women that we've represented is it's always been viewed as important for the person seeking parole to accept responsibility for the crime. Mm-hmm. In many cases, these clients committed the crime because they were victims of a serious crime. How important is it to you, and to your knowledge, to the board generally, that applicants take responsibility for the crime that they committed in the past?
Not as much as it used to be, because I think that we also have to be grown-ups and realize that there are some people who are in prison who did not commit the crime. And so we should not make it a prerequisite for them to accept that if they didn't do the crime, they shouldn't have to say, I did the crime in order to get an opportunity to go home. So I don't think that it's as prime of a factor as it may have been before. I think more of it is, what are you doing? I mean, you're here, and how have you made your life better and easier for you to transition when you come out? So I think it's a little bit more about that. It does make it a little bit difficult sometimes when folks are, I didn't commit the crime, so I'm not doing any programs, I'm just gonna sit in my, cell. It's that, those are a little tough, but that doesn't happen too much. At least folks are, if he went into prison and have an opportunity to get some technical training or some college education, they'll usually take advantage of that. But, those who just are adamant, I shouldn't be here, so I'm not going to do anything, it makes for a little bit different conversation.
Now, some of the statistics that we've seen indicate that there's a disparity in release rates as a matter of race. Mm-hmm. What is your sense of that?
I've been involved in government for a long time, so understanding that there are racial disparities to the point of where they are in this, I'm not really sure. I mean, I've seen some reports, but I'm not sure that they're consistent. I am willing to compare a red apple to a red apple, but so many times the racial disparities that we're looking at have come to us already baked. And what I mean by that, if you have a white individual who's committed burglary and gets 2 to 7, and a Black individual who commits burglary but gets 4 to 10, it's already off. I've asked the research unit over at Docs to take a deep dive, and try to help us to understand. I'm not really sure of all the numbers that we're hearing. But in the meantime, what we are trying to do is get people reconnected to their communities as soon as we can.
So just going back to your prior answer, in terms of acceptance of responsibility not being a prerequisite, do you think most of your fellow commissioners share that view?
Again, when we have those sessions, when we talk, we try to put these scenarios out there so folks can be aware and be more comfortable with it. So all I can say is that it's part of our conversations. And I think that we don't see evidence of people continuing to fall into the same traps. So I think that ultimately, it may not be the deciding factor on why they're held or released, but at least they've discussed it.
Let's talk a little bit about the process. How and when do commissioners get assigned to cases?
So it's random, of course. So we try to stay three to 4 months ahead. Part of that is just so that you can make sure that your logistics are together, and don't want anybody to run up to a situation where I did last July, where I did not make my hotel arrangements, and there's this little thing called the bar exam, and I couldn't find a room in Albany. So sometimes those things come up. So we try to make sure that people are scheduled randomly and that they know ahead of time. They usually have access to the files a few days before, because the files are delivered to the office that we'll be working out of, and they go and review and triage the cases so that they can be ready that Tuesday or Wednesday, whenever we're starting to do interviews.
And how and when do the commissioners get the parole packets?
They get the parole packets at the destination when they arrive at the destination.
And so on a given day, how many applications would a parole commissioner hear?
I guess maybe 14 in the case of a week, or 3 days. Yeah.
The one question is whether there could be ways that commissioners could get the packets further in advance and have an ability to.
Again, it goes back to digitalization. I mean, if we have it digital, you can almost have constant access.
Yeah.
And it's just updated for a parole review. But if we had digitalized files, we would be able to go back, go forward, do different things. I mean, I would love for us to have access, but again, that scenario where we have a commissioner in Suffolk who's traveling to Buffalo that week, that's 7.5 hours on the road that they could be reviewing files.
So if they weren't traveling, how would the interview work? You'd have the incarcerated person, and then I suppose commissioners in different places on Zoom?
Yes.
And is the obstacle to digitization just a matter of money from Albany?
It's a lot of things, but I think that probably the largest is it's a resource. But we are going to get there sooner or later, and I think now's a good time.
One of the questions I'm going to ask you at the end is whether there are ways we can be helpful, and maybe this will be on the list.
Yes. I know that you guys often have conversations with the governor's office and with legislators, and I think that it's time.
Yeah,
it's time.
Okay. And in terms of the parole,
I think we are either the last or the next to last state that's still doing paper.
Yeah. Now, quite a few states have done away with parole completely, which is unfortunate. But in terms of the parole packets, are there things that you like to see in them? For instance, do you find it helpful to have expert reports, expert psychologist reports?
I, I mean, I think that there's some luxuries that we'd love to add down the road. But if I had to prioritize things, just being able to have access is first and foremost. Having more specialized support staff would also be good. Like I said, they have a staff psychologist in Connecticut that's very, very helpful. And then we'd also like to advocate on the outside. I mean, I think that there are organizations like Osborne and Fortune that need to have more resources in order to, receive folks and give them supportive services. I mean, I think that when we give people the opportunity to come back home, we really want them to be successful. So whatever support it is that they need, we'd like to see that they have it so that they can be successful.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen is very difficult for people coming out of prison. I think it depends in part on where they're coming out. For instance,
certainly is easier in some places.
I think
in the city, there are more resources than there are some of the places in central and western New York.
I have one client who was released in 2017, who it was a murder, and she has been a model for people, for formerly incarcerated people. She's, doing all kinds. She's setting up a cafe for victims of human trafficking. She is working for Catholic Charities. She has been unable to get an apartment, unable to get any other job, even though she's highly qualified. It's just very, very difficult. And again, that's not a problem of your making, but it's really a challenge. Many of the clients that we have, and in general, the prison population is aging, and we know that recidivism rates among aging people is lower than the norm, and they also have health issues. Does the fact that elderly people do have lower recidivism rates, is that something that enters into your thinking as you consider parole applications?
Yes and no, but it's not the deciding factor. I think that I'm working closely with the Commissioner of Docs, who has the ability to create a medical parole pathway for a number of folks, which I believe he's doing much more than was done in the past. But I don't want anyone to stay a day longer than they have to stay. We want to get folks back to their communities. But we also have to have the community ready to receive some of these folks. So when you're talking about elderly incarcerated individuals who are returning home, that's added challenges. And we want to make sure that whether it's the family, some community organization, someone's there in order to help this person support. We've got to do it, but we also have to be prepared for it as well.
And have you seen situations where they don't have a place to go?
Unfortunately, yeah. And it's very frustrating for us that we have given someone a release, but because we don't have a place for them to be received, they're continuing to stay within state custody.
So in other words, you granted parole, but they don't have a place to go?
They don't have a nursing home to receive them or some other thing, and that's pretty frustrating.
Yeah. Is there advice you would offer to lawyers in the room representing or trying to help incarcerated people seeking parole?
It's one of the many priorities that the state has right now, and we just have to talk it up. I know that Governor has a lot of reforms on her plate, but certainly when we look at elders in the criminal justice system, we need to have some justice there. Not that we don't need to have some support for our elderly that are, already out in the community. But it's just, added difficulties, and we have to find a way to address it all.
What about for people coming before the board for their interviews? I mean, we give them advice, but is there advice you would offer as to things that you find helpful and important or unhelpful?
Yeah. It's been a while since we've updated our pre-parole videos and those types of things. So we're looking at updating that. But I think the, big thing is that, we want folks to know it's a conversation. It's not a hearing. It's just a conversation. Probably one of the most conversations that you're going to have. But we just want to talk and understand what headspace you were in, what you've been doing now, and give us as much information as we can so we can make the determination on your readiness to get back to your family and community.
One of the things that we've seen, which is a good thing, is that the hearings seem to, you call them interviews, but they're longer than they were when we started doing this work 8 or 9 years ago. Is that something that's been by design?
We try to be thorough. I mean, I think that we have to understand, before I think that some of the older versions of the parole board had made their decision from reading the file. They didn't even really have the conversation, so they didn't care. That's why they were so quick. But now we want to have those questions, and when there are things in that file that spark a question, we want to make sure that we have that conversation and that we can answer that question if it's going to be vital to our decision making.
So now my question: how can groups like ours be helpful to the board?
I think that you in your conversations with decision makers is to get this to be one of the things that's on their list of things that they have to do. I mean, there's a lot of need that we have in the state, but to make sure that those decision makers are also realizing that now is a good time for us to have some real criminal justice reform and updating of the model. This is a good time for us to do that.
What kind of criminal justice?
And it is working too, by the way. I mean, just a few months ago, another 2 facilities were closed. So the population is coming down. So some of your prior work is working, but still we have too many facilities and too many people in those facilities. But we need to just continue to work in order to prepare folks to get back to the community.
I think the digitization point you made really is important. I mean, from our standpoint, a lot of work goes into those parole packets. And so to have a system where commissioners would have more time to be able to review them would be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, let me ask, are there questions in the room that people, Charlotte?
Hi, Commissioner. Thank you so much for sharing this information. It's great to hear about the changes.
Charlotte, just for the benefit of everybody, just a minute on, or a few seconds on you and your background.
Oh, I've been around a long time. I moved here in 1986 and right away got involved with Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. There had been a hearing held there about domestic violence, and there were 12 women who participated in that and really changed the way we approach domestic violence services and advocacy. And so I've done a lot of things since then. I worked for the governor. I've worked, Governor Pataki. I've worked in the state court system, and I've been involved with this issue since 1986. So, and that leads me to my question, and that's about, have you convened groups, focus groups of people on parole and listened to what they would do if they would reform parole, and how does parole really work for them? Because I've been to a lot of meetings. I've heard a lot of presentations from people who don't have the same view of the world that I hear from people, and there's no fault in that. It's just you're not in the position to hear, what they go through. And so it might be more effective if we could create a response that really meets the needs and is led by that experience.
That's a great question and a great idea. And I would say that not as directly, but I have been a one-man band trying to reach for best practices. So, you know, as Rich said, we've met with his organization a couple of times. We've met with Osborne, with Fortune, and with others. So I'm always making myself available in order to have those conversations and hear some best practices. It's been interesting because I don't necessarily have answers during those circumstances. It's more like a listening tour, trying to get those ideas, but certainly also the Reform Alliance is another group that I've met with. So, you know, I'm going around trying to hear practices. I think I'm the first chairman that has ventured outside the borders of the state in some time. So I've gone to conferences, going to the home states of some of my colleagues to see I'm on a quest in order to try and come up with the best practices that will fit our New York State way of doing things. But I think we have a good window, so we're trying to push the ball.
I would just say that I'd be happy to help you with that. I have some time on my hands, and I'd be happy to help convene some people who, for their lived experience, to sit and talk with and learn from. And then also it'd be helpful you've presented so many things you're doing. It'd be great to see some data on how things are really changing, how much is really being incorporated. I won't talk anymore.
Charlotte, I just want to make sure I understand. Are you suggesting that you convene people who have gone through the parole process?
I would say people who've gone through the parole process fairly recently, and maybe a little bit more historically, people who are on parole and what they experience, what's helpful, what's not helpful, what could be helpful.
After release?
No, people could be on parole now. They need to feel comfortable that they could just talk openly, and, you know, and people maybe after they are off parole and say, this is, you know, my parole officer was great and really helped me in this way, or really, you know, screwed me up in this other way, or whatever it is. I don't know what they'll say.
But now, you don't have anything to do
with
Yeah,
parole
after
officers.
release.
Yeah,
parole officers after release.
Oh, you don't have anything to do with, I'm thinking about the Board of Parole, right? So well, they could also we could also convene them to talk about what their experience was going to parole, because I've met with so many people who had no idea what to, there's their whole life behind them. They're walking into the most important minute in their life when they meet with you, which you know, and they don't know what they're supposed to talk about. It's just, you've got 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even half an hour. What do you need to hear from me? And my freedom, I feel like my freedom depends on what I talk to you about.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. So, I mean, some pre-parole
why, by the way,
preparation.
Yeah. I think that's why the success rates where people have lawyers helping them prepare for the hearings, for the interviews, are so much higher, because we're able to talk to them about what we think is going to be important. Ross? Oh, I'm sorry.
We're up. Oh, yeah, okay, after you.
Okay, this will just be very quick because I'm just going to follow up on what Charlotte's saying. And I don't know if this is a realistic idea or not, but if there are two ways to think about it. These focus groups could happen if you're thinking of how you can partner with us in this room. Could be partnerships between nonprofits and some of these incarcerated people who are up for parole, gathering those ideas, figuring out what that is, and being able to partner with you and share that information. Another alternative could be, because your time is valuable and probably can't meet with everybody, I don't know if a paper survey works. I mean, it's old school, but we're doing old school anyway. So meaning if you have we've done this in different ways, but you basically have a few questions and you circulate that paper survey to the people who are incarcerated and let them write down their ideas. And then you get that back, you review that in your own time with your own group, and you see if there's something emerging there that you feel is worthy and needs to be addressed. And maybe you'll see a common theme. But, you know, in my experience, that still works, even though it's old school. And yes, digitization is definitely something that we would love to help with. You know, when we go up to Albany, this seems like something we can all get behind, because it's crazy that it's still happening.
Ross?
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Chairman. It was great meeting with you last time as well. So I have a question. So I agree that digitizing the files like everybody else would be terrific, but commissioners are already traveling to the region. Is there any thought to bringing back these interviews in person? I mean, all of us sort of take for granted now after COVID that we can communicate through Zoom. But I think that there's something, especially with the clients we represent, vulnerable, nervous people, that, you know, is necessarily lost over a Zoom connection. Is there any chance that going back to in-person meetings, since commissioners are already near that facility, would be possible?
I don't know that we've looked at that. I was not chair when we went to the video models as opposed to in person. I do know that the efficiencies that we are able to get are just, you know, having 3 interviews in a facility, packing up, and then going down the road to then have to go back through security. And it just, we pushed through it before. So I guess we could come back to it. But yeah, that's not anything that I've looked at, but I can, you know, take a look at that. But right now,
I
know
definitely
the
understand
efficiencies that we get, and we're not at our max number of commissioners either. So there's a couple of things. I mean, you know, when we've not been to the full complement of 19 commissioners in some time, and right now we're operating with 14. The efficiencies that we're able to get, you know, but you know, that's something that we can look at.
I thought it would be useful for you to hear, because especially our older clients, one of the first things they ask us is not necessarily about the questions they'll get, but about the format of sitting in a room. Are they going to be able to see me? What part of me are they going to be able to see? And it's just, yeah, I think it just adds an extra layer. So I was wondering if that was something you guys were considering, but, you know, just throwing it out as something.
I think there's
make a
some
difference.
updates that we need to do with our prep material, and that may be part of it too. But some of the concerns that you have are just, you're gonna be nervous whether I'm in the room or on the TV or, you know, on the telephone. I mean, it's a tough experience.
Rich, there was a question on the other side. Got to be a more efficient way than having me walk across the room.
That's it.
How you doing? My name is Kenny Jean-Baptiste. I did 18 years in prison. So a lot of the questions that you're answering, I could basically tell you from my perspective, right? And I do agree with you. I did in person when it came to going to the board. The intimacy in having the conversation made a difference. Even though I'm nervous or not, it didn't matter. You see, and you could relate. You see the person, you see the reaction, you see that. In Zoom, you only see one person. You don't see the other two. Some people might look at you and say, I want to hear more. And it's like a cue for you to say more. And then other things, some people say, we heard enough. Whatever the case may be, it's an intimacy to where it's very important to hear the person being intimate. As for your question, basically, no matter who you speak to, every case is different. For my case, I had a conversation like you mentioned earlier, but somebody else might be more of an interrogation. So each person is different. I work for Parole Prep. We have volunteers, we have staff who goes to speak to individually and speak to them. Because remember, you're reliving something that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. And sometimes when you're talking about it and having somebody speak to you from a different perspective, it gets emotional. And it's stuff that you never even touch. at all. Like a social worker might be able to pull something out of you that you had inside you that you held back that needs to be bringing out to yourself, to your family, and to the parole board. And that might be the difference between being released or not. Then you have elderly people that comes in. Some people say, yes, the low factors come being out there, right? But sometime, right, you have to think it too. When they get hit constantly, is it a political move? Because you have people who've been incarcerated because they was in a facility where somebody got shot, such as a cop. Why do someone have to do 30, 40 years because they allegedly got shot by a cop, or they actually did it? And who is the same person here 40 years ago? I could tell you right now, there's a lot of things I didn't do 40 years ago, right? Right now, I've been home for over 8 years. I'm part of the Democratic Party. I'm on a community board member. You're in politics, you know what I'm talking about. I work in my community constantly. I work with re-entry constantly. So even the person that you're talking about when it comes to housing and stuff, what criteria they have to do, what things they have to do. I see the prejudice, I see what's going on. I worked for the city for about 4 or 5 years. So I've been in and out of the system, meaning that I've been around. So I know what goes on, but you have to deal with everybody individually. Take time. It's not just a one-size-fits-all situation when it comes to people. And that's what I want to bring up to. So when you speak to your lawyers, speak to your clients or whoever it is, treat them individually as you the only person who's going through this. Because I don't care if you had the same person say, I was in the same cell at this time and we did everything together, but his experience, because of his background and emotional, his experience is different and what he went through, because you do not know what kind of tragedy that person went through. So it's very important. And I didn't want to just make it a statement, but my question originally was, because I went to address with everybody else, was that when you have individuals that was allegedly shot a cop, right? Do you play hard on, do they have to do a certain amount of years before they could be released? Because I know that's most of the popular questions people ask, right? Because there's a lot of individuals that have changed, or even matter of fact, they have one leg now, they can't even walk, and they're not a danger to anyone right now.
So that's a good question.
So I want to address that. That's my original question.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's it. So, it's interesting where you have a law enforcement officer who's been killed. I mean, one of the things that I imagine you get is pressure from the community or from the victims in a case like that, or more generally.
Well, I appreciate the question coming to me, because had he asked the PBA, they would have told him that we've now released 27 people who've, and
27 people who killed policemen?
Law enforcement officers, yeah. And they are, feel that we have a open door policy there. We don't treat folks who have inflicted crime against police officers any different from anyone else. But when we do release these individuals, normally we do get a lot of pressure and pushback from our PBA, friends at PBA. And that's part of the job. But on those days when they beat us up, the advocates who feel that we are not as aggressive, we hear nothing. So I think that we too sometimes would like to hear some balance as well. It's a tough job that we do. We look at each case individually and make the best decision that we can make at that time. But no, we don't have a different process when we deal with folks who've inflicted death or injury on law enforcement officers. The other points are well taken. We are trying to take advantage of technology in order to bring forth better efficiencies. And that is an area that we often discuss, regardless of in-person versus video. But we certainly are able to get some efficiencies. something that maybe we can look at when we're up to 19 commissioners, when we're operating full cylinder, that then we can kind of afford that, sometimes 2 hours in between interviews when we have to pick up and go. See if there might be a way, since we've gone to more of a hub situation at some of these facilities, that maybe as opposed to us having to go from one side of the facility to the other, that we could be in a central location and then maybe people can come to us. So there are some ways that we can find some efficiencies. But point well taken.
Hi, my name is Lee Taylor. I also work at Parole Preparation Project. I had 2 questions, if you let me ask 2 questions. The first one is just, you mentioned wanting to standardize decision-making and what that would look like. And I'm curious to hear about some of the factors that you would think about and what you think like standardizing that actually decision-making process would look like. And then the second question, at Parole Preparation Project, we work with many people throughout New York State who are going to the parole board and still, I recognize you talked a lot about like trying to move away from solely focusing on the crime of conviction. And we still seen a lot of decisions that the board does go back to the crime of conviction as the reason for why they're denying someone's parole. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about if there's been any effort to making decisions be a little bit more clear about like what someone could do to actually be able to get the release that they've been working hard for, right? Whether that's like the board recommending programming or certain things, because we still see that people have a lot of confusion about like, if they're making this decision based off the nature of the crime, what else can I do to actually be able to be released?
Yeah. We're not perfect yet. We're getting there. But as the leader of the team, I feel that it's incumbent upon all of us to leave some breadcrumbs at the end of our decisions. For a couple of reasons. First of all, it's kind of cold just to say, you're not going home.
Yeah.
So I think that, when you write your decision, you kind of give the reasons, and then at the end, use this time to do 1, 2, 3, right? And not only does it help that individual have something to shoot for in those breadcrumbs, but it actually makes the next interview easier because then I can say, I looked at, Commissioner Towns' last report and, you were denied, but he said, use this time to do 1, 2, and 3. I can almost start that interview by, have you done 1, 2, and 3? You're going home almost situation. So it almost makes it easier for your colleague when they come back the next time. So that's more of the practices that we're trying to put in. Not perfect yet. There's still some folks on some days rely on that old shortcut way, of which then I have to call them in and we have to have more conversations. But I do think that if you look, that's happening less and less. I think that folks are trying to take the opportunity to not go the lazy way, which is to rely on the instant offense. You can't ignore it. That's why you're here in front of us. But there's much more for us to talk about to make a determination on your readiness for returning to the community and your family.
Oh, and then I was just the question about like, if you were to standardize the decision-making process, what are some of the factors that you all would really focus on?
There is a thing called SDMF, Standardized Decision-Making Framework. You can find it on the website for NIC, National Institute of Corrections. They have mentored a number of states in moving towards that, but it's been customized for each state. So to kind of tell you what it is now, while we're still in the initial areas, it's just something that we want to get to and take out the subjectivity and just make it a thing where it's more, if you hit these points, that's how we make our decision, as opposed to, today I'm looking for blue, tomorrow I'm looking for, that type of thing. And then we know the conversations that get out there amongst the incarcerated individuals are saying, hey, this is what they're doing, and this is what you need to do. So if we can, stop being such a moving target and just be in a pocket, I think will help everybody at the end of the day, whether we're doing it in person, on video, or whatever. But if we standardize our protocols, I think it helps everyone.
I think we have time for one or two more.
Hi, I'm Freddie Davis. I was one of those people taking the bar that stole your hotel spot. So I was also really curious about this objectivity point, because sometimes you hear like you really want to be able, like, and you've said it yourself, you want to be able to like have a conversation and get to know like the other person apart from their file. So how, like in the early stages of like brainstorming about creating like a more standard decision-making process, like how will you allow for the incarcerated individual to sort of present themselves and present factors that don't necessarily that like speak to like maybe they would be a good candidate for release, but don't necessarily come off well on paper?
Yeah, we anticipate that, right? I mean, because it's intimidating. It's intimidating. But I think that if we look, and even whether you're having a good day or a bad day, you got that electrician's certificate. Whether it's a good day or a bad day that day, you got your bachelor's degree. So there's a number of things that we can ask that are not dictated on how you're feeling today, but what have you been doing over the time that you've been incarcerated? So that's more of the way that we want to look at it. Looking at the instant offense, do you have an understanding of what was done there? What was going on that day? Fine. You say you're innocent and you didn't do it, fine, that's good, okay? Now let's go to how you've been doing your time. And most importantly, if you get out tomorrow, what are you gonna do? Where are you gonna stay? What are you gonna do? And those types of things. So it's past, present, and future. The question should be put in a way that it's not about how you're feeling today, because we know that just like you, I could be having a good day or a bad day, but it's about the time and trying to get a longer snapshot than just that moment that we're talking with you.
One more question.
Okay, it's a very trivial one, but talking about technology and making and efficiency, since these interviews are on Zoom, are they recorded? Do you have an opportunity to look back at how an interview went, and after the fact, do the commissioners look back, or do they make a decision immediately afterwards, or do they have an opportunity to kind of, maybe one of them was not really paying attention or wants to hear the answer again before, if they disagree on how the case should be decided?
Yeah. No, they're not recorded, but there is a transcript.
Right, but the video is not recorded.
The video is not recorded, but there is a transcript. And usually, sometimes that can tell a story that may I or the counsel's office may want to have a follow-up conversation with one of our commissioners. It may dictate that, but no, it's not video. But we do watch to make sure that someone who might be having a bad day is not coming across in a bullying type of tone and those types of things, which we're humans too and have good and bad days. So usually when something like that is pointed out, we'll have a conversation and try to point it out and those types of things.
When you say when a situation like that is pointed out by who? Like by one of the commissioners would notice that,
That's
things.
the first place. Your colleagues at the table
Right.
will say, go get a glass of water, take it
Okay.
easy, what's going on or whatever. Sometimes I'm given a call, hey, so-and-so's having a bad day. And then more times than not, just in reviewing transcripts, sometimes things pop off a page that will dictate me to have conversations.
Would it be appropriate for any of us to bring that to your attention if we see it?
Absolutely. As you know, I'm probably not a traditional chairman of the parole board. I probably talk too much and get myself in trouble. But I think that if we are going to make changes, it's going to be all of us. And it's not just the changes that are inside of me, which is why I've been getting around and going around and participating in these types of things, trying to get some best practices and ideas so that we can make necessary changes so that we can be more user-friendly and have the type of results that we all would like to have.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you. I have to say, from my standpoint, it's very inspiring. And it is terrific to have you at the helm of such an important organization. And, you know, I think if we can really get to a point where the ideas you put forward become the norm.
Ideas we put forward, because the things that I'm looking at doing are nothing that I've thought of. I mean, it's just been because I've been places and folks have targeted me to go here, go there. And I just think that we're at a place in New York State where change is possible.
Well, again, thank you very much.